So the seal reading describes another binary opposition, this time between normal and pathological. So we've talked about many binaries, and there are power relations within these discursively constructed relationships where one side of the binary has a lot of power and the other side is robbed of its relative power. Just as the one and the other, or male and female, or mind and body, we can also add the binary opposition of normal and pathological. Social norms are the moral rules that regulate our conduct and promote a sense of solidarity and belonging to community as a member of that community and culture. And this feeling of belongingness is contrasted with other feelings of potentially being outside society, as if you're excluded and as if you're not a member because you don't readily fit into the norms or unspoken rules of conduct for that culture. Like I said on the week on semiotics, in order to be a participating member of a culture, you need to share meaning with others. You need to be able to possess meaning inherently and communicate meaning to others that they can then understand and derive commonly held meanings from. Norms are largely what bind us together socially. There's some sort of common vision of what society should be and common ways of conducting ourselves. And as humans, we all desire to be members of a social group, to get that sense of certainty and security, that you're protected and insulated from the chaos of the outside world. So consequently, we adhere to and often want to adhere to the norms set by our society because we want to fit in. It's not pleasant to be stigmatized or cast out or excommunicated from social life by virtue of having a status that deviates from the norm. And scientific and medical discourse plays a large role in establishing a norm, especially norms with regards to notions of healthy behavior and appropriate modes of social behavior. Scientific discourse often measures that, and then once it sets a standard in place, then everyone else is measured against it. And anyone who deviates from the norm of healthy behavior and social behavior to a degree that's arbitrarily deemed as excessive by scientific and medical discourse, then they're labeled and considered by that discourse as being deviant, and they're treated as such in a very stigmatized way. Like I said on the week on dreams, with the case of hysteria and hysterical women being studied and treated by Freud, they're brought under the control and auspices of medical observation treatment, and then throughout the rest of their lives, they're treated and seen by society as being abnormal, as not a member, a truly fitting in member of that society. So people who are labeled as pathological, as deviating from the norm, are put at a disadvantage. And basically any social or power relation they enter is kind of set up against them because of them being labeled as pathological. So it behooves people to not be abnormal. People want to see themselves and be seen as normal. But again, definitions of normality are arbitrary and are set in place by people who benefit from you trying to act normal and conduct yourself accordingly. So even though this is discursively constructed to seem like a binary, a black or white binary, before you reach the point of being categorized one way or the other, normal, pathological, it's not a simple one or the other. It's, like I said, it's a deviation. Scientific discourse and medical discourse have established an arbitrary norm of what's considered normal. And then people can deviate from that slightly, like acceptable ranges. But then once you go a bit too far from what's prescribed for normality, then you're suddenly on the flip side of the binary of being pathological. Even if you're just 1% past the realm, the range of acceptability for normality, it doesn't matter. You're now categorized with everyone in the group of the pathological who don't meet that standard. So to be normal, as constructed by medical discourse and scientific discourse, is to be complacent and to be non-challenging regarding those macro level social structures that structure a lot of our everyday lives. So in this way, conceptions of normality are normative in themselves. Normality is essentially normativity, where people judge themselves according to what science and medicine deems as normal, and then they change their behavior and adapt to become more normal. So medical and scientific discourse's construction of normality purports to merely claim how things are, but they're also implicitly claiming how things should be. That's the normative part, the should, the ought to be. It's not merely saying what is, it's also making value judgments on what should be. So normality is the definition of what is normal, and normativity is the definition of what should be normal. And they're often conflated by medical and scientific discourse. And then on the flip side of the normal, the otherized side of this binary opposition that's in the shadow of the normal is the pathological, those who are deemed and defined as not meeting the norm, not fitting into the acceptable normal range of social behaviors. And people marked by medical disorders or visible disabilities as being pathological are then stigmatized. They lose that sense of certainty and security that we all seek through inclusion of as members of a social group or culture. So the position of people classified and categorized as pathological are much more precarious in social situations. Like they're prejudged before they enter any social encounter or interaction, as if they've been marked, like a tattoo on their forehead saying, treat me differently, look at me differently. And like I said, it puts them at a relative disadvantage. They start off on the wrong foot in terms of every interaction or relation they enter into, because they may be judged based on their condition, even if it plays zero role in that interaction or social relation. So social stigma wields a great deal of exclusionary and marginalizing power. And people can and are stigmatized on the basis of many different conditions that are deemed as pathological by scientific discourse, such as visible disabilities, like I said, or certain patterns of behavior, such as drug addiction or alcohol addiction, or any sort of sexual deviations that deviate from that standardized norm of heteronormativity and traditional gender roles. So the Seal reading employs the example of the stigma applied to people who contracted the AIDS virus in the 80s and how they're stigmatized in many ways by virtue of this condition. First, they have the physical appearance of frailty and illness, which stigmatizes them. But not only that, it's the moral and value judgments that are bundled in to the subject position of the AIDS patient. There are all sorts of bundled in allegations of sexual promiscuity that comes with the AIDS virus. They're kind of implicitly judged and blamed by society as if they did something wrong and immoral and unhealthy to contract it. And they're then relegated by medicine and society to be a second-class citizen, some sort of disfavored social group. And of course, the AIDS virus is often unfairly conflated with homosexual promiscuity specifically. And this kind of stigma will make people want to withdraw from society entirely. Like, why would you want to go out and participate in social life if you're being judged and stigmatized and excluded? And once you're stigmatized, it can define everything about you. Like I said, even stuff that isn't related to the matter at hand, it becomes like a master status or a label that's bestowed upon the person who's stigmatized, which spoils all other aspects of their identity. So that becomes all you're known for. Everything you do and your actions are explained within the frame of your stigmatizing condition. So if someone who is defined as having a mental illness becomes angry at something, everyone around them, the doctors and society, will interpret that emotion of anger from within the frame of their mental illness to explain their anger away as just a sign of illness, as opposed to them possibly being rightfully angry at something. Everything about that person's character is reduced to their mental illness. So that's all they're viewed as, and all their actions and behaviors and ideas are discredited as merely being symptoms of that illness. Again, the stigma can make people reticent to share what they're experiencing or struggling with. There are many people out there who aren't sensitive to mental health. So if you admit to them that you're going through mental health struggles, some people could then see everything you do as crazy. Like, you could be crying because you're sad about something, and then others could be like, oh, they're having a mental breakdown, they're having a nervous breakdown, or they're bipolar, or they're freaking out. Or a similar thing with overweight people. Oftentimes, in all areas of their life, they're judged according to that. Like, all of their actions are retroactively explained within the frame of them being overweight. So they, do something as simple as going for a walk. Other people driving are like, wow, look at them. They're finally making a change in their life and trying to get some exercise. Like, it could just be that they're going for a walk and you don't need to judge them, but they often are judged in everything they do as having like a lack of self-control, purely due to that master status that they are labeled with, the stigma that comes with being overweight in society. Or another example, if someone's ever struggled with addiction, suddenly that becomes all you're known for and known as. Your entire identity is reduced to being a druggy lowlife. And again, everything you do is framed within that context of you being stigmatized in that way. So even if you do something good, people could be thinking like, oh, they just want to get a fix. They're just trying to get some reward so that they can then go buy drugs and feed their addiction. As humans, we seek to make sense of the world around us. The world around us is chaos and everything's in flux. And in order to have some sort of certainty and security in the world, we make narratives about our place in the world to make things seem a lot more cohesive and rational and neat and tidy and explainable than they really are. So the institutionalized narratives provided by medical discourse are sought out by individuals to make sense of and explain the meaning behind whatever they're experiencing. So if you're feeling something wrong in your body and you want to have it explained, because otherwise it gives you that sense of chaos and existential dread and that deep-rooted fear that something's wrong with you and you don't know what it is. You want it to be neatly explained and narrativized by medical discourse. It instills a sense of comfort in us when we can rely on a medical authority to give a name to what we're feeling, especially if it's a fancy technical medical term, often in Latin, allowing us to rationally explain the diagnosis and thus restore order in our personal worlds. It provides a sense of comfort and solace to the patient because they now know what they're experiencing is normal in the sense that it has been documented in medical discourse before, and they know they're not the only ones suffering from that illness, which would be very alienating. If you were suffering from a malady that science and medicine claimed it couldn't understand or diagnose or treat, once you know what you're experiencing has a name and a medical label and a prescribed treatment regimen, you can give a discernible, concrete form to what you're experiencing, and you may feel a more comforting sense of control over it. It restores that sense of normality and belonging to the group that we all strive for, and a sense of relief when medical discourse is able to explain whatever we're experiencing that feels wrong in our bodies. And as I've made the connection multiple times with this lecture, medical and scientific discourse has replaced religious discourse in this capacity. We used to explain our suffering in the sense of religious narratives to make sense of our problems of human suffering according to the religious rationality predominating at the time. So if you're feeling unwell, religious discourse may explain it as the result of living in sin or having done something to anger God, or maybe your suffering is all part of God's plan, thus instilling a similar sense of comfort and normality and membership and inclusion, and that everything's going to be okay. That's what medical discourse now does. Medical discourse is the new socially legitimated ritual of inclusion. It defines who does and does not have membership in the normal group in society. So when you're feeling something wrong within yourself, you go to a doctor to get it explained and rationalized, and then you feel relief that you still belong as a normal part of society, and that what you're experiencing has already been recorded in medical discourse and given a name, and that other members of society are experiencing it too. But what about people with ailments and issues that can't be explained or treated by medical discourse? Take, for example, people with chronic pain or certain illnesses that defy medical explanation. That doesn't necessarily mean there's anything inherently wrong with them just because the relatively limited and narrow medical discourse isn't equipped to explain. Like I said, medical discourse isn't equipped to explain a lot of things in areas of our lives that it claims to be able to. Medical discourse claims that, and we often believe that medical discourse can and should be the be-all, end-all explanation for everything in human experience and human life. As a result, anyone whose conditions and experiences fall outside of the explanations offered and imposed by medical discourse is made to feel abnormal and alien and consequently isolated and cast out from the rest of normal society. They're made to feel irreconcilably different from those around them who have a normal life and aren't racked by chronic pain. So these people are made to feel as if they're on the outskirts of medical discourse and consequently on the outskirts of shared meaning and normal society and just normal everyday life, which can be an extremely alienating realization to continually have to face. Social norms can also be enforced through the scientific production of statistics and data and all these mechanisms of knowledge production by which certain behaviors are measured by the scientific method and thus subjected to calculations of scientific rationality regarding what is and isn't normal. So scientific discourse produces large bodies of knowledge and alleged evidence for producing a definition of what's normal. And they measure things like crime and illness and turn them into statistics. And there's something about statistics that we just tend to put a lot of faith into them as being objective knowledge about the workings of humanity and society. There's just something about a statistic, the form it takes, that we tend to more readily believe as true. But remember, 99% out of 100% of statistics probably aren't true. And that's a statistic, so you can know it's true. But unfortunately, it's upon statistics that a lot of government policies are dispensed and just our way of thinking in general. Like I said last week with how metaphors structure a lot of how we experience and interpret existence, statistics are another element in discourse that guide our ways of experiencing and interpreting reality. Because like I said at the outset of the lecture, we can't see all of reality for ourselves. So we have to take the word of the experts. Like we can't know about all the crime that's occurring everywhere or all the COVID cases that are happening in all places. So we just see and hear crime statistics or COVID statistics on the news. And that forms a lot of the way we look at and interact with other people and with society in general. Like I know earlier on in the pandemic, people were very fixated on the case numbers. And some people would structure their lives, or at least their everyday life, based on what numbers were given to them that day. Like, oh, Bonnie Henry said we're over 500, so I'm not leaving my house until it's under 500 again. But that statistic doesn't reflect a reality that if you were to leave your house that day, you were going to come into contact with all 500 people who were contracted with COVID that day. It's just a number, but it governs a lot of our conduct. So statistics are imbued with a lot of power, and they ideologically seem to us as being representative of objective knowledge, but statistics can outright lie, if not significantly twist and distort the reality of what's going on in order to prove a certain point or benefit a certain interest. Or again, it could be an unconscious bias on behalf of the scientist or researcher or expert who is measuring something and then producing statistics based on that potentially flawed or biased measurement. So it's important to always take statistics with a grain of salt and ask who produced this knowledge and under what conditions and for what purposes. What definition of normality comes about from the preponderance of that statistical knowledge?